Welcome to the Family Program for Zion Recovery Services. This presentation is intended to provide information for the friends, families, and loved ones of the men and women who are engaged in our substance abuse programs. It's important to realize that addiction and alcoholism are diseases which impact every facet of the addicted person's life, which includes relationships with family, friends, loved ones, spouses, employers, and the individual's entire community. Because addiction is a family disease, it's important for family members and others close to the individual to have the best information possible in order to help their loved one in his or her recovery process. We hope to provide some of that information in this presentation. Throughout this presentation, we will use the terms addiction and chemical dependency to refer to a dependency to either drugs or alcohol. The first thing to know is that chemical dependency is a disease. There can be any number of reasons why addiction or alcoholism develop, but once it has developed, the affected person must treat his or her chemical dependency as a disease in order to successfully recover. Here are some concepts to understand. It's good to remember the 3 C's. First off, it's important to realize that you did not cause the addiction in your loved one. Addiction can have many different factors that cause it to come about in a person's life, and sometimes it just simply springs up. Next, you have to understand that you absolutely cannot control your loved one's addiction. Addiction by its very nature is a life that's out of control and uncontrollable. And finally, know that you can't cure it as much as you would like to. Addiction is a lifetime disease that can be kept in check and it can be treated, but it's going to take a lifetime effort on an everyday basis by your loved one. So tell yourself this often: I didn't cause it, I can't control it, and I can't cure it. Addiction is a disease. Now, admittedly, many of us were skeptical when we were first told that addiction is a disease. Possibly we thought of this as just being a cop-out or a way for the addict to avoid taking responsibility for their decisions. It's totally understandable if you feel the same way. However, here are some facts to consider. The definition of a disease is any deviation from a state of health. I think we can all agree that an addict or an alcoholic in the midst of their addiction is not a healthy person. In 1956, the American Medical Association acknowledged alcoholism as a disease. Dependency has symptoms. It's treatable. It has a prognosis. And very important, if you treat it as a disease, people get better. If not, they don't. It has symptoms. It's a primary disease. It's progressive. It is chronic, which means that it's long-lasting, and if left untreated, it is fatal. Some of the symptoms are blackouts, preoccupation, medicinal use, tolerance, unpredictability, personality changes, loss of control, using alone, withdrawal, hiding the drug, rapid use, relief use, consequences, indefinable fears, and physical and moral deterioration. Blackouts are a temporary loss of memory of what happened while using. A blackout can last a few minutes, a few hours, or even days. Preoccupation. This is excessive thought which is devoted to the desired substance. Preoccupation indicates the top priority which chemicals have in a person's life. Narcotics Anonymous explains preoccupation like this: our whole life and thinking was centered in drugs in one form or another, the getting and using and finding ways and means to get more. We lived to use and used to live. Very simply, an addict is a man or woman whose life is controlled by drugs. Medicinal use. This is where the chemically dependent person tends to prescribe for themselves, seeking relief from tension, pain, anxiety, or as an aid to sleep. This is sometimes called self-medicating. Personality changes. The person behaves in a manner not like themselves. They become a different person. You start wishing you could see the old person back again. Hiding the drug. This includes being misleading about the amount they're consuming, or hiding empty bottles, or hiding their drugs. Rapid use. Large amounts used in a very short time. Using to gain some sense of relief. This is rationalized use. Hey, I deserve it, or hey, if you had my problems, you would too. Using despite negative consequences in their lives. This could be going to the hospital, going to jail, having trouble with the law, losing their job, getting kicked out of school, losing friends, family, having financial difficulties, physical difficulties, and even death. Sometimes an addict will have a state of indefinable fear, living in a state of constant anxiety, paranoid, no apparent reasons. Withdrawal. This could include shakes, tremors, other physical symptoms. Physical and moral deterioration. This is where a chemically dependent person begins to experience physical life-threatening consequences, and their behavior becomes unthinkable at some point in their lives. While most addicts and alcoholics have strong morals and values, their addiction often compels them to abandon or disregard their moral code. This causes them a lot of inner turmoil. Ironically, that same inner turmoil often drives them to use more and more in order to numb the pain. This is kind of a self-perpetuating cycle. Addiction is considered a primary disease, which means it's not a secondary symptom of another disorder. However, dependency will sometimes arise as an attempt to self-medicate for depression or anxiety. Addiction is a progressive disease. It gets progressively worse over time. The dependent becomes increasingly physically, spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically ill. Addiction is a chronic disease. There is no cure for addiction. Recovery is based on complete abstinence from all mood-altering chemicals. It's sometimes helpful to think of addiction as being very similar to diabetes. Diabetics, they're able to go on and function in a normal way so long as they take care of themselves on a daily basis. Addiction is much the same. Tragically, addiction is also a fatal disease. The disease can only be arrested. If not, the person very well could die. Like any other disease, addiction will predictably progress through several stages. Phase 1 is when the individual begins to learn that the substance use will improve how they feel. Every time the individual uses their substance, they go from a neutral state to a euphoric state, and this happens every single time. During phase 1, the individual begins to trust the substance that they are using to provide the relief that they are seeking. They also begin to learn how to control the effect by controlling the amount consumed. During phase 2, the individual begins to apply what they learned in phase 1 to their social activities. They use the chemical at appropriate times and appropriate places. They develop self-imposed rules and they adhere to them. For example, I don't drink after 5 p.m. They might suffer some consequences. They continue their ability to control the times, the quantities, and the outcome of all their chemical using experiences. Social users remain in this phase. Now, victims of chemical dependency advance to phase 3. In phase 3, the individual begins to experience periodic loss of control over their chemical use. They can no longer predict outcome once use begins. Their behavior under the influence comes into conflict with their value system, which causes them emotional pain. And you can see on the chart that now, instead of going from euphoria back to a neutral state, they go from euphoria to a state of pain. They begin to develop spontaneous rationalizations which hide the emotional pain. This loss of insight becomes a growing delusion that will continue throughout their usage. Negative feelings about themselves remain unidentified, therefore they're not resolved. This results in a growing chronic emotional distress. They stay in that pain, experience growing anticipation and preoccupation with the use of the chemical because that's what's going to bring them back out of the pain. During this phase, lifestyle will change. It tends to revolve around their using. Specific times to use are established and they're rigidly conformed to. Self-imposed rules established in phase 2 are now regularly being broken. Tolerance increases, causing the victim to create more ingenious ways to get, use, and keep the chemical, for example, hiding and sneaking. They begin to project self-hatred onto the other people around them. The dependent's whole life is deteriorating as the chemical use affects their health, their spirituality, their emotionality, and their relationships. During phase 4, the addict no longer experiences euphoria, but is simply using or drinking in order to feel normal. Their using to feel normal has replaced euphoria. Blackouts occur frequently. Tolerance decreases. Physical addiction can occur. Paranoid-like thinking is present. Geographic escapes are made. If I can only go to this new place, my whole life will be better, but unfortunately the addiction follows them there as well. They might encounter spiritual bankruptcy and even a loss of desire to live. Some of the common warning signs of addiction and alcoholism are denial, defensiveness, tendencies towards loneliness, minor or major depression, periods of confusion, and becoming easily irritated with family and friends. Other warning signs can include irregular eating habits, irregular sleeping habits, loss of daily structure, developing an I don't care attitude, open rejection of help, feelings of hopelessness, and thoughts of socially using and drinking, or the ability, longing for that ability to be able to use socially or to drink socially again. Because the family is so impacted by the person's addiction, certain rules begin to develop, such as don't talk, don't feel, don't trust. The dependent's use is the most important thing in the family's life. For example, the addict is obsessed with maintaining their supply, and the rest of the family is just as obsessed with cutting it off. While he hides the drugs, they search for the drugs. While the addict stockpiles, the family pours liquor down the drain and throws away the drugs that they find. Like two football teams, their goals lie in opposite directions, but they're all playing the same game. They all plan their day around the dependent's using hours. The addict tries to ensure that nothing interferes with using. The family either frustrates the plans or arranges to be at home to meet his demands, or not be at home to avoid his anger or possible embarrassment in front of friends. The dependent's use is the overriding family concern around which everything else revolves. As the disease of addiction progresses, the family goes into some denial as well. At first, the dependent and his family deny that the addict is abusing alcohol or drugs. Later, the family denies that the addict is dependent on the chemicals. And finally, when dependency is just glaringly evident, the family insists that it is only a complicating factor, not the root of whatever difficulties have led them to seek help. The denial continues by making excuses for the addicted family member or justifying their behavior, such as someone or something else has caused the dependency. The addict is not responsible. Here, the addict's tendency to project his guilt or blame onto somebody else gets crystallized into a rule that gets imposed on the rest of the family. The addict then redirects attention to the wife, children, job, or anything else to keep his or her using out of the spotlight. If the distraction is a person, then curiously, that person often will accept the delusion and they become overwhelmed with guilt and feelings of worthlessness. The addict or alcoholic begins to teach family members to enable the addiction. Everyone in the family must become an enabler. When asked, family members are quick to say they would do anything to get the addict to stop. But unconsciously, they are sometimes helping him to continue. They are in effect enabling him, and everyone does their part to protect the addict and in turn his dependency. They provide alibis, they cover up, they take over responsibilities, they accept the rules and the quirks rather than rock the boat. Now, their actions are often motivated by love, loyalty, or family honor, but the effect is to enable the slow progression of the disease. No one can discuss what is really going on in the family, either with one another or an outsider. Feeling threatened, the chemically dependent person wants first to avoid letting outsiders know about family affairs, and secondly, to block family members from gaining access to information and advice from outside that might undermine the family's willingness to enable. A set of family rules evolves. Don't think, don't talk, don't feel. Don't feel. This is a standard rule in severely dysfunctional families. Addicts experience so much emotional pain themselves, they simply cannot handle the additional emotions of the family, which in turn makes their own pain sharper. So the addict requires true feelings to be hidden. As a result, communication tends to break down, becomes rigid, distorted, and incomplete. The communication often bears very little resemblance to what's really going on. As the disease progresses, the chemically dependent person will repress his or her own feelings, unconsciously replacing them with false feelings that are less painful. The family is presented with contradictory messages. This can be expressed in different ways, such as, if the kids would show a little responsibility about money, I wouldn't have to be so hard on them, when actually what the addict is feeling is that I am worried I will lose my job because of all the Mondays I've called in sick. Or, if you were more affectionate, I wouldn't stay out late at nights. In actuality, what the addict is feeling is, I know I'm not satisfying you. I don't know what's happening to me lately. Or maybe, why should I go to church? The new minister is only interested in money. In actuality, the addict is thinking, I'm no good. I can't face either the minister or the congregation. The false emotion expressed in behavior is usually the exact opposite of the real feeling that lies underneath. These rules, don't talk, don't feel, don't trust, help to drive the creation of unhealthy roles that the family members assume. A few years back, there was a story going around about a frog in the water. It goes like this. If you put a frog into a pan of boiling water, it will jump out faster than the eye can see. But if you put the frog into a pan of water that is the frog's body temperature and then you slowly turn up the heat, the frog will stay in the water, even to the point of boiling alive. Why is this? Because the frog does not notice the gradual change in temperature. Chemical dependency works the same way. The heat is constantly turning up, but nobody notices. Cunning and baffling. It's a progressive disease. It may start out with casually accepting unacceptable behavior, making excuses like, oh, he didn't mean that, he just had too much to drink last night. Then, a few years down the road, the behavior has slowly grown more and more and more intolerable, but it's still being accepted, and then that behavior actually becomes the norm. As the disease progresses in the family, the chemically dependent person's attention is focused more and more on the chemical. The spouse's attention is also focused on the chemical as the spouse attempts to control the dependent's use. As the chemical becomes the focal point in the family, problems arise as the progression of the disease increases. To cope with resulting dysfunction, family members assume roles to cope with the painful emotion of addiction. The roles assumed are not exclusive to addiction. These roles appear in other families which are experiencing stress or difficulty. Children universally need attention. The roles developed are designed to gain that attention that they're lacking. These children are in competition with the chemical, and as the progression increases, the heat of the competition also increases. It's important to remember that children tend to blame themselves for a lack of attention. They begin to think that I must be doing something or something's wrong with me. These are the unspoken thoughts that feed toxic shame, and they'll continuously impact their lives without help. Let's take a look at the different roles in an addicted family. The first role is that of the victim of chemical dependency himself, the addict or the alcoholic. On the outside, they exhibit hostility, manipulation, aggression, self-pity, blaming. Sometimes they can be quite charming and a very rigid value system. But on the inside, they're experiencing shame, guilt, fear, pain, and hurt. The next role is that of the chief enabler. It's often the spouse, but it can also be a child or it can be a parent. On the outside, the chief enabler is exhibiting self-righteousness, being super responsible, sometimes very sarcastic, passive, sometimes passive-aggressive. Sometimes the chief enabler can become physically ill and often exhibiting a martyr attitude. On the inside, however, the chief enabler is angry, hurt, feeling guilt, and feeling a lot of low self-esteem. The family hero is the caretaker of the family, often the oldest child. On the outside, this is the good kid. This is the high achiever, follows the rules, approval seeking, very responsible, but on the inside, a lot of guilt, hurt, and feelings of inadequacy. The scapegoat, this is the difficult child. On the outside, hostile, defiant. This is the rule breaker, often in trouble. On the inside, rejection, hurt, guilt, jealousy, anger. Next is the mascot, the family clown. On the outside, immature, fragile, cute, hyperactive maybe, distracting. On the inside, however, a lot of fear, anxiety, insecurity. And then there's the lost child. This is the forgotten child. On the outside, shy, quiet, has a fantasy life, solitary, gets off to themselves a lot, very mediocre. They get attached to things and not people. On the inside, rejection, hurt, anxiety. So as the disease progresses in the family, there are different developmental stages. First is there's that change in family roles. People start to assume roles which will help to stabilize the family, which will help to get the attention that they're seeking. And there's often a reversal of the parent-child interactions. Sometimes the child becomes the parent and the parent becomes the child. The family begins to use rules of silence, denial, isolation, increased boundary transactions, increased isolation of the family, and just a pervasive feeling of guilt, shame, low self-esteem. On the other hand, when a family begins to recover from addiction or alcoholism, there are also some developmental stages. Addiction shaping influence on family rituals is diminished. Expression of feelings is encouraged. There's a decrease in stress-related medical problems, development of healthy attitudes, and a decrease in compulsive behaviors of all types, and not only by the addict, but by the family members themselves. There are 4 levels of family healing. Each family member, addicted and not addicted, have a personal recovery process that involves restructuring addiction-shaped patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. The relationships between the adults in the family, the marital or the intimate relationships, these require recovery that are separate from individual therapy. The relationship between parents and children often becomes somewhat topsy-turvy in an addicted family. It's important that the parent-child relationships be reconstructed and that the parent starts becoming the parent again and allowing the child to become the child. A lot of times in an addicted family, in order for the family to adapt to the addiction, there's been some deterioration in the relationship between siblings. This also needs to be reconstructed. As you enter into the recovery process within your own family, here are a few words of caution and some things that you need to be aware of. First off, a crisis in intimate relationships is pretty predictable in early recovery. The addict themselves, they're often confused and uncomfortable in their struggle to rebalance themselves without the drug. For them, the rules of the game have changed. They may be irritable, intolerable during early recovery. And the most serious threat to your relationship is your own failure to get into a parallel recovery process. You need to take care of yourself. You need to begin recovering from the addiction yourself as the addict begins recovering from his addiction. Individual, couple, and/or family therapy can help family members to learn new and constructive roles instead of the unhealthy roles that were adopted in order to adapt to the dysfunction in the family. In order for families to go forward in a parallel fashion in their recoveries, therapy is desirable if not essential. Remember, forgive and forget, make the first move, get to the heart of the matter, and time will often heal all wounds. Thank you for participating in our family education program. Just to wrap things up, remember that the family needs to recover as well as the chemically dependent person, and there is more help available. We can help you to find the resources that you need. Just contact your family member's counselor. This might involve family counseling. It might involve support groups. Above and beyond all things, take care of yourself as you're trying to recover from the impact of this addiction. Thank you.